All right, so number 1, we're completing the square. We need to solve for x. So in order to solve for x, we have to factor. And the way we're going to factor is by completing the square. There may be other ways to factor this, but I want to use completing the square process so I see that you guys have mastered it. Okay, and ultimately when we use the completing the square process, we are getting this in vertex form. So vertex form looks like this, where h and k is the vertex of our equation. All right, so first we need to, I'm going to follow the steps on the screen. So put the variable terms are on the left of the equal sign in standard form, and the constant term is on the right. So get it looking like this. So this is my end result, or before the end. So right now I want my equation to look like this. So I'm going to do that now. So all I'm going to do is move this over. So then I get x squared minus 2x equals 15. Okay, this looks like this. Yes? Okay. Now it says, step 2, divide by a so the coefficient of x squared is 1. So is my coefficient 1? Do I need to divide anything? No, I'm going to leave it. Now I'm going to take 1/2 of the coefficient of the x term. Take 1/2 of the coefficient of the x term. Square it. So I get -1. I'm going to square it. I get 1. And add the quantity to both sides of the equation. Okay, so I'm going to add this value to this side and to this side. So it's going to look like x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 15 plus 1. So for these now, we're adding to both because now we have this equal sign. We're balancing the equation. Before, we were balancing an expression. So that was why we had to do one had to be plus, one had to be minus, because if you have an expression, like if I just show you something like this, 3 plus 2 is 5 plus 1, this is 6. But if I have to add, but let's say I want to keep 6, right? If I add a 1, now it's going to be 7. So what do I have to do somewhere else to make it equal still 6? I need to minus 1. So we want that 0 value because we want us to keep it the natural way. With this, we're balancing an equation. If I add 1 to the left, I'm allowed to add 1 to the right because now I have both values on both sides. All right, so now we have x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 16. So number 4 says factor the perfect squared trinomial on the left side of the equation and simplify the right side. So I simplified the right side already. We're going to make this into our perfect squared trinomial, which is using this number in the middle of the number you squared is the one that goes in here, equals 16. And some of you stopped here. Step 5 says use the principle of square roots. So the principle of square roots is that if you have something squared and you take the square root of it, the squared value, it's like it cancels it out. So now if I take the square root, I have to do the square root of both sides. I get x minus 1 by itself equals, the square root of 16, you should know, is 4. So some of you are leaving in a square root of 16, simplify it. We're going to do practice on simplifying radicals actually the next lesson, which we maybe could have done that first. I didn't realize we needed to do practice on radicals, but there are some hard radicals you may need to know how to simplify, so we will get into simplifying stuff that looks like this. All right, and when you take the square root of something, it could be positive or negative, right? If I do this, -4 squared is 16 and +4 squared is 16, so we don't really know which one it is, so we have to put both. So number 6 says solve the remaining equation and check your answer in the original equation. So I'm going to solve, but now that I have 2, I'm going to solve it twice. I have x minus 1 equals +4, and I have x minus 1 equals a -4. So if I solve this one, I get x equals 5, or x equals -3. Okay, and you should be checking I didn't make that. If you were reading directions, you should have been checking, but since I assigned a lot of problems, you don't have to fully plug it in. If you wanted to check, you would have to plug in 5 and -3 into your original formula. You can do this in the calculator, obviously. It's a lot to do it by hand, but if I wanted you to show me to check, make sure you do it. But these are the answers to number 1. Okay, I'm going to do one more so that you have a harder one, like one with a coefficient, so that this will help. Let's do number 3. I saw people struggle with number 3. So we have 2x squared plus 8x minus 7 equals -2. All right, first step is to put the variable terms on the left and in standard and the constant on the right. So I want my equation looking like this, equals C. So I want all these terms here. I gotta move this one. So I have 2x squared plus 8x equals 5. Okay, so step 1 is done. Step 2 says divide by A. So the coefficient of x squared is 1. So step 2, divide by A. So A is 2, so I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides. That means my GCF is 2. So now I have just x squared inside plus 4x equals 5. Okay, hopefully we're good so far. So first I move the 7 over with the inverse operation. Remember, we want this to just be x squared, so I'm going to divide by 2. If it was a -2, I'm going to divide by -2. So get rid of everything. We just want it looking like this. We want the x's on the left, the number on the right. Okay, step 3 says take 1/2 of the coefficient. So this is the completing the square process. So you're going to take that 4 divided by 2, which is 2. You're going to square it to get 4. So this is the number that's going to be added to both sides of, add this quantity to both sides of the equation. So this is step 3. So now this is going to turn into x squared plus 4x plus 4, that's where it goes, equals 5 plus 4. Now, and I saw some of you do this, remember, you're not just adding a 4. Now that you took it at GCF, you're technically adding a 2 times 4. So that means you have to do that 2 times 4 here. So we added the 4, but I'm going to multiply it by that 2 because if we took out that GCF. So we're actually not adding just a 4 here. We're adding actually a positive 8. And for this one, we don't need to, remember, we're balancing an equation on expression, so they both are going to be added. Okay? Now I need to do step 4, which is factor the perfect trinomial on the left and simplify the right side. So simplify. So I want my equation that looks like this. So I'm going to make, so this number, if I factor this right, 2 numbers that make 4 and add to 4, multiply to 4 to add to 4 is 2. They're the same, right? It's also this number inside. Equals, simplify this. This is going to be 13. Okay. Now use the principle of square roots. So 5 is, we're solving for x. So before I square root it, I have this 2. So what do I have to do? We have to get x by itself. So let's get rid of that 2. Let's divide it by 2 on both sides. So now I have x plus 2 squared equals, some of you did 6.5. You can. That's fine. We can do a decimal. It's okay. All right, now we take the square root of both sides, right? Principles that these cancel each other out, so I'm just left with x plus 2 equals plus or minus square root of 6.5. I'm going to leave it because it doesn't give me a nice number, I don't think. You could have left it as a fraction too. All right, and then the last thing to get x by itself is I subtract 2 on both sides, and remember, put this number in front because mathematically we put the radicals behind because it makes more sense. and especially because we have a plus or minus. And then you can separate these out, right? Because I technically have two solutions here. So I'm just move this up a little. So I have -2 plus radical 6.5, and I have -2 minus radical 6.5. And you can leave it like that since this isn't like a nice number. Some of them you're gonna get like a perfect square in here, and some of them you can just leave like that. Okay? So that was number 3. Hopefully this helps you. Ask me questions if you have them. But just follow these steps and make sure you are solving for x.